the Ukrainian military is intensifying its strategic air campaign against Russia's oil infrastructure. And the attacks are becoming more complex and far-reaching than many realize. Kyiv is no longer just aiming at the obvious targets. Pumping stations, key pipelines and chemical plants that feed Russia's defense industry are now squarely in the crosshairs. Increasingly, these critical facilities catch fire and burn after Ukrainian drone strikes, and the implications ripple far beyond local damage. In this video, we'll take a close look at the latest strikes, which targets were hit in recent days, how deep these operations reached into Russian territory, and what the real damage to Putin's war economy looks like. Spoiler, it's worse than most people expect. When you map the pattern of strikes, one thing becomes unmistakably clear: no refinery is safe. Kyiv is systematically pushing its reach farther and farther east, picking off the last functioning nodes of Russia's refining network one by one. The attack on the Orenburg refinery, about 1,400 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled areas, is a striking example. That facility, one of the oldest in the southern Urals and a central hub for gasoline, diesel, jet fuel and lubricants, went up in flames after being struck. Losing a facility like Orenburg is not merely a local outage. It removes a linchpin in the distribution chain that supplies both civilian and military consumers across a vast region. Days after Orenburg, Ukrainian strikes reached even deeper, all the way to western Siberia, where the Antipinsky refinery in the Tyumen region was hit. That facility processes millions of tons of crude per year and was seen as a strategic fallback once Western refineries were degraded. Videos from the area showed emergency crews racing to blazing storage tanks after explosions and reports of mobile network disruptions. Hitting a site that far inside Russia shifts this campaign from harassment to strategic disruption. Kyiv is not only destroying capacity, it's removing the Kremlin's ability to reroute supplies to where they're needed most. Strategically, these deep strikes are devastating because Russia already scrambled to adapt after losses in the West. When multiple westerly refineries were damaged in August and September, the Kremlin tried to patch the system by redirecting flows through more remote hubs and alternate rail routes. The facilities we're seeing struck now were meant to be those relief valves, and with them knocked out, the supposed backups collapse. That means shortages are no longer temporary blips. They become systemic, affecting distribution, pricing, military readiness, and civilian life. What's especially remarkable is how Ukraine is achieving this without always using its most advanced missiles. Multiple Ukrainian sources report the attacks were carried out with extended-range drones, upgraded variants of the so-called Lyuty platform, rather than with the heavier cruise missiles some analysts expected. 2 months ago, Lyuty was said to have an effective range of around 1,200 kilometers. Now we're seeing strikes on the order of nearly 2,000 kilometers. That jump in operational reach, combined with reliable strike results, demonstrates both rapid Ukrainian adaptation and gaps in Russian defenses. That brings us to air defenses. Critics have long pointed out limitations in various Ukrainian weapon systems, questions about stealth, radar signatures, and cost-effectiveness. But the real takeaway from these recent strikes is that Russia's layered air defenses are failing to stop even slow, noisy, piston-engine drones. These platforms lack stealth and are easier to detect than modern cruise missiles, yet they still penetrate and strike high-value infrastructure. The problem isn't just technology. It appears to be detection coverage, response coordination, and perhaps degraded command and control under sustained pressure. In short, Russia can no longer reliably protect its own strategic rear areas. The downstream effects are already visible on the ground. The Kremlin imposed an export ban on gasoline to preserve domestic supplies, but that measure has only softened the blow. In many regions, fuel is scarce, and rationing has become routine. On the occupied Crimean Peninsula, authorities have limited purchases and capped prices to avoid public unrest, telling indicators of deeper supply stress. Diesel reserves that once allowed the military to keep logistics moving are now dangerously depleted. In some districts, fuel stations are closed. In others, long queues and black market premiums are the new normal. For an armed force that depends on constant mobility, that shortage is a crippling vulnerability. You can see the consequences at the front. At the start of the year, a substantial portion of Russian frontline units operated with armored vehicles and tanks. Now, the share of armored vehicles in everyday operations has collapsed. Heavy tanks appear in only a tiny fraction of assaults, and many units rely on motorcycles, quad bikes and light trucks, simply because they are cheaper to operate and require far less fuel. Armored maneuvers that once defined battlefield momentum are being replaced by improvisation and constrained mobility. Even if the Kremlin can muster hardware on paper, feeding and fueling that equipment has become the real limiter. Ukraine doesn't attack oil infrastructure in isolation. These refinery strikes are often synchronized or followed by attacks on rail links, fuel depots, and key nodes in the transportation network. The combined effect is to break the supply chain. Even where fuel still exists, it cannot be moved efficiently to where the forces need it. That amplifies every single refinery hit into far wider logistical breakdowns. The more Kyiv degrades distribution, the harder it becomes for Russia to project sustained military power. There are also political and economic ramifications at home. As citizens face rationing, rising prices, and the visible decline of services, public confidence in leadership erodes. Reports that government officials are convening daily emergency meetings over fuel and logistics underscore the scale of the crisis. Desperation shows up in odd policy choices, discussions about bringing back banned fuel additives, or imposing strict price controls and rationing, measures that signal a country running out of flexible options. Economically, lower refining throughput reduces exportable refined products, squeezes state revenues, and forces Kremlin decision-makers into trade-offs between domestic stability and funding their military campaign. Another notable point is Ukraine's weapon management strategy. Kyiv appears cautious about deploying its highest-value systems wholesale. Some powerful systems remain in reserve, saved for specific windows of opportunity. That restraint suggests a deliberate approach. Use cheaper, scalable means, like long-range drones, to systematically erode capacity while keeping precision, long-range strike assets for moments that require decisive blows. We'll dig deeper into that calculus in future coverage, but what we can say now is that this combination of persistent pressure and selective escalation is compounding the Kremlin's problems. So what does all this mean going forward? If Kyiv continues to extend its operational reach and keeps striking logistics and refining nodes, Russia's ability to sustain both civilian life and military operations will keep degrading. Fuel shortages will force further improvisation on the battlefield, economic strain will deepen public dissatisfaction, and Moscow's strategic options will narrow. The campaign we're seeing is not random. It's a focused attempt to turn the resource base that supports war into a vulnerability. I want to hear your take. How effective do you think these strikes will be over the long term? And how many weeks or months do you think it will take before the last meaningful refinery capacity is gone or severely impaired? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them and I'm curious what you all think. If you found this breakdown useful, please like the video and subscribe for more updates. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.